The day I found that letter changed everything. Among my grandpa's old letters, kept for decades in the drawer of his oak desk, was the document that made me leave my life in Seattle. The lakeside cabin at Blackwood Lake, built by him in 1952, wasn't just another property in Montana. It was the heart of our family for 3 generations. 10 years working in civil engineering at one of the West Coast's biggest construction firms seemed insignificant compared to that yellowed paper. My grandpa's words described not only building the cabin, but also his vision for preserving that little slice of paradise for future generations. Now, at 35, I'm back home. The scent of pine and the sun, reflecting off the clear lake water, greeted me like I'd never left. Little did I know that decision would put me in the middle of a battle to save my family's legacy. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to check out more stories like this. My peaceful routine at the cabin lasted only 3 weeks. One October morning, while I was having coffee on the porch, I noticed some unusual activity on the north side of the lake. Tractors and construction equipment were coming in a convoy, followed by a fleet of black SUVs. At the local market, I caught the first whispers about the Silver Pines Resort. Sarah, the grocery store owner who's known my family for decades, warned me about the Homeowners Association buying up lands around the lake. "They're not like us, Jack," she said while topping up my groceries. "They came with promises of development, but all I see is people being pressured to sell their properties." I decided to check it out on my own. I drove over to the construction site and found an imposing structure rising among the century-old trees. Richard Whitman, the HOA president, was personally overseeing the work. Tall, gray-haired, and wearing an impeccable suit, he stuck out like a sore thumb in Montana's rustic setting. He approached me with a calculated smile, as if he'd been expecting me. "Ah, you must be Mackenzie from the South Cabin. I was just about to chat with you about an interesting proposal." His words dripped with sweetness laced with something sinister. Before I could respond, his assistant, Derek Thompson, appeared with a folder stuffed with documents and maps. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. In the resort's plans, my property was shown as part of the complex, a fancy country club with a killer view of the lake. Whitman kept talking about inevitable progress and market values, but all I could think about was the promise I made to my grandpa to keep our legacy alive. The following week, I got an official notice from the Silver Pines HOA. The document, full of legal jargon, claimed that my property was automatically part of the association because of some old territorial clause. They demanded immediate changes, standardized paint, specific fences, and even alterations to the cabin's original structure. At the first meeting at the HOA's headquarters, Whitman ran the presentation like it was his personal show. The room was packed with executives in expensive suits, all pretending to care about the concerns of local property owners. I stood up and challenged the legality of this forced incorporation, showing them the original property documents. Derek Thompson, the HOA inspector, interrupted me by flashing a folder of violations my property supposedly committed. "Your cabin doesn't meet the minimum safety and aesthetic standards set by the association," he declared, adjusting his glasses with an air of arrogance. "Fines start in 30 days. "This cabin has been in my family for over 70 years, I said, keeping my cool despite my rising anger. "You have no legal authority over my property." Whitman smiled condescendingly, like he was dealing with a stubborn kid. "Mr. Mackenzie," he said, leaning over the mahogany table, "progress is inevitable. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your property sits right in the middle of our expansion project. Be reasonable." I left the meeting with my blood boiling, but determined to fight back. In the parking lot, an elderly lady approached me, introducing herself as Martha Williams. "They did the same to me," she whispered, nervously glancing around. "First, the fines, then the veiled threats. I've already lost 5 neighbors to them." I drove home thinking about Martha's words. On the way, I passed by the Johnsons' property, which until last week had been a century-old farm. Now, it was nothing but rubble and construction machinery. The sign, "Future Home of Silver Pines Executive Homes," seemed to mock everything our community stood for. That night, I called my cousin Emily, a lawyer in Helena. "I need your help," I said. "This is bigger than just my cabin." The next few days turned my life into a nightmare. Derek Thompson started showing up by chance on my property, snapping photos and taking notes. Every morning, I'd find new violation notices slapped on my door. Fines piled up for absurd infractions like unauthorized wood tone, inadequate landscaping, and incompatible historic structure. The intimidation ramped up when I started getting anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Accidents happen with old cabins, a distorted voice would say. On the lake, resort jet skis deliberately rode near my deck, creating waves that damaged my little dock. Martha Williams wasn't the only one reaching out. Other property owners began sharing similar stories. Tom Fisher lost his inn after constant inspections scared off his guests. The Rivera family was forced to sell when astronomical fines made it impossible to keep their restaurant by the lake. At lunch in the local cafe, I noticed hostile stares from people I'd never seen before in town. "They're resort employees," Sarah whispered. "They're buying up everything around here, even people." The next day, her cafe received a surprise inspection from the health department. My cousin Emily discovered that the HOA was messing with public records. "They're changing property boundaries and inserting retroactive clauses," she explained during a visit. "They're being careful, using legal loopholes and documents that look legit." Pressure mounted when my access to the main road was mysteriously closed for maintenance. The detour added an extra 40 minutes to my commute. When I questioned the town hall, I found out the permit had some shady signatures. One night, as I was driving home, I discovered my mailbox smashed. Inside was a pre-signed sale contract with a price way above market value, along with a note, "Your last friendly warning." Whitman wasn't playing around. The final straw came when I learned that Thompson had notified the building department, claiming my cabin was at imminent risk of collapse. A corrupt inspector issued an emergency demolition order without even properly inspecting the place. That same week, my car suddenly broke down on a deserted road leading back into town. The mechanic found signs of tampering in the brake system. "I've never seen anything like this in such a new car," he said, clearly rattled. "Be careful, son." The last drop was when neighbors reported seeing people photographing my every move, tailing me around town. Sheriff Anderson, a longtime family friend, admitted his hands were tied. "They have connections in Helena," he said, frustrated. "But keep recording everything. Sooner or later, they're gonna slip up." The noose was tightening, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. Emily suggested putting up discreet security cameras around the property. "They're gonna try something even more direct soon," she warned. "We've got to be ready to catch every move." Looking out at the lake at dusk, I thought of all the families who'd given up. My grandpa's cabin isn't just wood and nails. It's a symbol of resistance against those who wanted to turn our paradise into yet another playground for the rich. And I wasn't about to give up without a fight. The cameras Emily installed began picking up a suspicious pattern. Resort employees were doing inspections on neighboring properties at the same times, noting details that later mysteriously changed in the official records. Stephen Parker, an employee from the Public Records Office, secretly approached me at a gas station outside town. Shaking, he admitted he was being forced to tweak old documents. "They've got something against me," he confessed, handing me copies of the original records. "But I can't live like this anymore." Emily and I spent nights combing through the documents. The changes were subtle but significant. Dates shifted by a few days, signatures slightly different, and property boundaries moved by a few strategic meters. Everything was technically legal, as long as no one dug too deep. Sheriff Anderson managed to dig up information on some shell companies tied to the HOA. "Whitman's got a shady history," he said. 3 different towns, same modus operandi, but he always comes out clean." We started piecing together a web of connections among local politicians and the resort's investors. A key breakthrough came from Martha Williams. Her granddaughter, who works at a local bank, found records of shady transfers. The HOA was paying consultants to public officials in key positions, even the inspector who issued the demolition order on my cabin. By cross-referencing details with other property owners, we uncovered a larger scam. The HOA first devalued properties with fines and restrictions, then offered to buy them at seemingly generous prices. The money was flowing from a Cayman Islands fund, one that was impossible to trace. Emily even managed to recover deleted emails through an IT expert. The messages revealed that Whitman planned to dredge part of the lake to build a private marina, a project that would have devastated the local ecosystem. The environmental permits had already been pre-approved through bribes. Sheriff Anderson got in touch with ex-resort employees willing to testify. "They made us sign false reports," one former security guard revealed. "We'd fabricate violations to pressure owners who wouldn't back down." Others confirmed there was even a blacklist of people they intended to force into selling. Our investigation uncovered that Derek Thompson wasn't a qualified inspector at all. His background included extortion charges from other states, all mysteriously dropped. In reality, he was Whitman's persuasion specialist. The final piece came when Stephen Parker found the resort's original master plan. The document showed that the planned expansion was 3 times larger than what was publicly disclosed. My cabin wasn't the only target. They wanted the entire south side of the lake. With Emily's help, we organized all the evidence into an airtight file. Bank records, emails, testimonies, photos. Everything documented and verified. "They're meticulous," Emily said. "But they didn't count on so many people ready to speak up." Sheriff Anderson reviewed our documentation. "This is enough for a search warrant," he confirmed. "But we need to act fast, before they catch on to what we've got." We decided to wait for the perfect moment, knowing Whitman would eventually drop the ball even more. The opportunity came sooner than we expected. On a Friday night, the security cameras caught Derek Thompson and 2 unknown guys breaking into my property. They were wearing gloves and carrying sketchy backpacks. I immediately called Sheriff Anderson, who was monitoring the situation. The intruders broke in through the back of the cabin, thinking I was out in town. Instead, I was watching everything from the barn, streaming live to Emily and the sheriff. Thompson headed straight for the office, rummaging through documents and planting fake evidence. "We need 5 more minutes," one of the men whispered. "Whitman wants it to look like an electrical accident." My blood went cold when I realized they planned to set the cabin on fire. The cameras caught Thompson installing devices in the old wiring while his accomplices spread accelerants disguised as cleaning supplies. At that moment, headlights lit up the property's entrance. Sheriff Anderson pulled up with 2 deputies, quietly surrounding the cabin. Emily was with them, clutching a folder of freshly issued search and arrest warrants. Thompson and his crew realized too late they were cornered. They tried to flee through the back but ran straight into the deputies. In their backpacks, we found all the incriminating stuff: incendiary devices, forged documents, and even an external hard drive that belonged to the HOA. Sheriff Anderson handcuffed Thompson himself. "You have the right to remain silent," he said, as the ex-inspector tried to negotiate. "But I'd start thinking about making a deal." The other 2 quickly offered to testify against Whitman. When we analyzed the seized hard drive, we struck gold. Detailed spreadsheets of bribes, fraudulent contracts, and a complete list of target properties. Whitman had meticulously documented his own criminal scheme, probably as a backup plan against betrayals. News of the arrest spread fast. Locals began gathering at the entrance of my property, many coming forward with their own tales of harassment and intimidation. Sarah from the cafe even brought coffee and donuts for everyone, turning the crime scene into an unexpected community meeting. Emily organized a team to photograph and catalog every piece of evidence. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, examining the files. "There are records of similar schemes in 3 other states." Sheriff Anderson had already reached out to the FBI. The next few hours were pure chaos. Police cruisers kept rolling in, now with federal agents joining the investigation. Martha Williams identified names in the financial records, linking crooked officials to the scam. The most shocking bit came from Thompson's personal files. Photos and detailed reports of previous sabotage incidents, including accidents that forced other owners to sell. My break issue hadn't been a random act. At dawn, with the cabin now sealed off as a crime scene, I watched the lake catch the first rays of the sun. The nightmare wasn't over. We still had to face Whitman, but for the first time in months, I felt like the tide was turning. Stephen Parker showed up with more documents. "You're gonna need this," he said, handing over another folder. "It's time to end all of this." Emily flipped through the papers and grinned. "I think it's time we paid a visit to the HOA headquarters," she said, warrants in hand. The next morning, we led a convoy straight to the HOA headquarters. Sheriff Anderson was at the front, followed by patrol cars, federal agents, and our legal team. Emily held a folder full of warrants while local reporters broadcast live. News of Thompson's arrest had spread like wildfire. Whitman was in a board meeting when we burst in. His arrogant smile faltered when he saw the federal agents. "What does this mean?" he demanded, standing up. I personally handed the folder with the evidence onto his mahogany desk. "It means it's over," I said, watching his face turn pale as he flipped through the documents. The other board members started to stand up quietly, but the agents blocked the exits. Emily began reading the warrants out loud, each charge more serious than the last. Extortion, fraud, conspiracy, attempted arson. "You don't have anything," Whitman stammered, trying to keep his composure, but his voice betrayed his nerves. Just then, Stephen Parker walked in with boxes of original documents. Before Whitman could reach for his own folder, a federal agent intercepted him. "In fact, we've got it all," Sheriff Anderson said, spreading photos of the cabin break-in across the table. "Your buddy Thompson is already cooperating." Looks like he kept detailed records of all your special instructions. Whitman's facade crumbled. Panicking, he tried to delete files from his computer, but FBI techs had already taken control of the servers. On screens around the room, years of criminal activity were unveiled live. One by one, the board members began talking, each eager to strike a deal. "It was all Whitman's idea," one shouted. "He assured us it was all legal." Another director broke down, confessing about offshore accounts and systematic bribes. Emily coordinated the seizure of the documents as I watched Whitman get handcuffed, the same guy who had mocked my naivety months ago. "You don't understand," he tried to argue. "We were bringing progress to this backwards region." Outside, a crowd of locals had gathered. Former property owners who'd lost their lands, employees forced into the scheme, families who refused to back down. Everyone was there to witness the collapse of Whitman's empire. Martha Williams stood there, tears streaming down her face as Whitman was led away. "My husband built our home with his own hands," she said. "He never lived to see this, but now justice has been served." Federal agents even found safes hidden in the walls filled with damning documents. Whitman had kept files against everyone involved, his insurance policy turning out to be his undoing. The scam was even bigger than we thought, with ties to other states. When the last police car left, I stayed behind with Emily and Sheriff Anderson, watching the federal agents seal off the building. "It's gonna take months to process all this," Emily said, exhausted but satisfied. "But it was worth every second," I replied, thinking of my grandpa's cabin and all the other properties that now had a fighting chance. The sun set over Blackwood Lake, and for the first time in a long while, its reflection on the water shone brighter. The following weeks were intense. The legal process moved fast, with Whitman and his partners facing multiple federal charges. Emily worked tirelessly, not only representing my case but also helping other property owners get their lands back. The HOA scam completely fell apart. Investigations uncovered over 50 properties illegally acquired in the last 3 years. The judge ordered the immediate dissolution of Silver Pines and mandated the return of the properties to their original owners or heirs. Tom Fisher got his inn back, the Rivera family managed to reopen their lakeside restaurant, and Martha Williams cried tears of joy when she received the deeds to her home, now free from the HOA's abusive restrictions. Sarah even expanded her cafe, which turned into a community hangout spot. The fraudulent documents were voided, and the bogus fines were canceled. The building department, now under new management, acknowledged the historical importance of these old properties, creating regulations specifically for their preservation. Whitman's political connections turned out to be his weakness. Several public officials were indicted, and a complete overhaul of local administration began. Sheriff Anderson's insistence on proper investigations was pivotal. Stephen Parker was recognized as a key witness and got federal protection. His testimony helped dismantle similar schemes in other states, exposing a corruption pattern that stretched throughout the Northwest. During the trial, Whitman tried to cut a deal by naming even bigger schemes, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took only 3 hours to convict him. Derek Thompson and other HOA execs also received hefty sentences. The unfinished resort was abandoned, and the town transformed the area into a natural park, preserving the lake's north shore for future generations. The decision was celebrated not only by property owners, but by the entire ecosystem. One quiet afternoon, sitting on the cabin's porch with Emily and Sheriff Anderson, we watched a group of kids fishing on the newly rebuilt dock. "Your grandpa would be proud," said Anderson. I smiled, knowing that his legacy would continue to live on. A year passed since the fall of Silver Pines. The Blackwood Lake community not only survived but flourished in ways nobody expected. Our story of resistance against the HOA grabbed national attention, inspiring other communities to fight back against predatory development. I turned part of the old farm into a community center, where we document our battle and offer legal help to property owners in similar fights. Emily, now a property rights specialist, frequently holds free workshops for locals. My grandpa's cabin remains exactly as he built it, but now it carries an even deeper meaning. It has become a symbol of perseverance, drawing visitors who really want to see the place where a community decided to make a difference. Sarah even jokes that she needs to print more menus ever since our story made the national news. The waters of Blackwood Lake remain crystal clear, free from the threat of artificial marinas or overdevelopment. Those old dirt roads that Whitman wanted to pave still hold their rustic charm. Sometimes I even see Martha Williams walking them, picking wildflowers like she used to do 50 years ago. Sheriff Anderson retired, but still pops by to fish off the dock and tell stories about the Great Battle of Blackwood Lake, as he likes to call it. Stephen Parker returned to town and opened up a little bookstore where he keeps a special section on historical preservation and community rights. On summer evenings, when the sun sets behind the mountains and the lake catches those last golden rays, I sit on the porch my grandpa built and feel a deep peace. The sound of kids laughing as they play in the water mixes with the birds' songs, creating a symphony no fancy resort could ever match. In the oak desk drawer, along with my grandpa's letter that started it all, I now keep the original property deeds and newspaper clippings about our victory. They aren't just pieces of paper. They're reminders that some things are worth more than money and that a united community can move mountains. My grandpa's legacy wasn't just preserved, it was strengthened, and future generations will know that here, on the shores of Blackwood Lake, we chose to stay true to our roots. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to check out more stories like this.